How medieval kings actually slept in freezing castles, boring history for sleep. Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing beneath the shadow of a medieval castle just as winter dusk folds over the valley. The stone walls rise dark and wet above you, their edges silvered with frost, while river mist crawls across the lower fields and gathers around your boots. Your cloak smells of damp wool, your fingers ache inside stiff gloves, and every breath leaves a pale cloud in the air. Somewhere beyond the gate, smoke hangs beneath soot-black rafters. Horses stamp in frozen mud, and a chapel bell sounds through the cold with that slow iron voice which seems to belong to another century. Torchlight trembles along the battlements, straw clings to your soles, a cartwheel groans nearby, as though medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. And if you are wondering how anyone lives comfortably here, the gentle truth is that you probably would not last a week out here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, comment below with where you are listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step beneath the outer gate while the last grey light drains from the sky. The portcullis hangs above you like a row of black teeth, but the guards seem far more interested in stamping warmth back into their feet than intimidating anyone. One man keeps both hands wrapped around a small cup of weak ale, another has tucked scraps of wool around his ankles beneath his boots, a practical little defense against the cold that no court poet is likely to mention. Inside the courtyard is busy in the slow, weary manner of a household preparing for night. Grooms lead steaming horses towards the stables. Kitchen boys carry split wood under their arms. A servant hurries past with 2 covered dishes, protecting them from the wind as carefully as though they contain relics of a saint. Perhaps they contain only onions and boiled beef, which at this hour may be nearly as sacred. The castle does not feel warm because a king lives here. That idea disappears quickly. Stone stores cold with remarkable enthusiasm. Walls that keep out arrows also keep in dampness, and the narrow windows admit more winter than daylight. Rushes lie thick over parts of the floor mixed with herbs meant to sweeten the air. Some swear lavender keeps sickness away. Others prefer rosemary rue or whatever the steward can obtain before the roads freeze. No one can quite agree whether these herbs truly purify anything, but they certainly improve the smell of wet boots, dog smoke, and several hundred people living. You follow the movement inward, passing beneath an arch where melted snow drips from a roof edge. Somewhere, a dog begins following you, a shaggy brown creature, with the confidence of an animal convinced that every stranger carries sausage. It trots at your heel. Ahead, servants are lighting more beeswax candles in the passage towards the inner ward. Beeswax is expensive cleaner and sweeter smelling than common tallow, so its presence tells you that you are entering spaces used by people of rank. Even here, however, the flames are small. They bend whenever a door opens. Shadows stretch across the stone. The castle seems to breathe cold air through every crack. Beyond another doorway you glimpse the great hall glowing with firelight. You do not enter yet. Instead, you pause beneath the covered walk and watch the royal household gathering for the night. Clerks arrive with ink stains on their fingers. Men-at-arms loosen sword belts stiffened by frost. A chaplain crosses the yard with his cloak pulled nearly over his nose, dignity, surrendering quietly to weather. Then the king appears. There is no trumpet blast, only a subtle change in the movement around you. Heads bow. Conversations soften. He comes from a smaller chamber, accompanied by attendants wrapped in a heavy, fur-lined mantle that gives him far better protection than your own cloak. The fur may be squirrel marten or another prized skin. A medieval king wears hierarchy even when trying not to freeze. Still, his hands are cold. You see him rub them together before accepting a pair of gloves from a servant. Wealth changes the quality of discomfort. It does not abolish winter. Even the ruler must walk from one draughty room to another, while smoke catches in his throat and wind creeps beneath doors. The household follows him across the inner court. You move with them, your dog still behind you. Torches hiss where snowflakes strike their flames. Above, the battlements are invisible against the darkening sky, but watchmen continue their circuit cloaks, snapping in the wind. Far outside the walls, the road disappears toward villages, monasteries, roadside shrines, and frozen fields where peasants are indoors beside smaller fires. The chapel bell sounds again. Time here belongs to bells more than clocks. Monasteries and chapels divide the day through prayer, and even those who cannot name every canonical hour know the rhythm. The sound tells servants to hurry. It tells guards that another portion of the night is approaching. It tells you that darkness has arrived before supper is ready. At the door to the hall, you scrape mud from your boots against a stone edge. A servant pulls open the oak door, and a wave of warmer air reaches you, carrying smoke-roasted meat, damp wool ale, and the sweetness of wax. For a moment, warmth feels close enough to trust. Then a draught slides past your ankles. The dog sneezes. You begin to understand the central trick of winter life. In a royal castle, warmth is never a permanent condition. It is something people gather guard, layer, carry, feed, and lose again. The king may command armies, collect market tolls, own forests, and sleep beneath costly fabrics. Yet tonight he must still negotiate with the same cold that settles over every roof in the valley. You cross the threshold behind the royal household as the great oak door closes against the wind and the winter evening begins. The warmth inside the great hall reaches you slowly, not like stepping into a modern heated room, but like entering a pocket of air that has merely agreed to be less cruel. The fire burns broad and orange in the central hearth, and additional braziers glow along the walls. Yet the high roof seems determined to steal half their effort. Smoke climbs toward the rafters, curls among dark beams, and lingers there in a blue-grey layer before escaping through vents above. Every now and then a wandering ribbon of it drifts lower, making someone blink and cough politely. You follow the household farther inside. The king moves toward the raised table at the upper end of the hall, where the floor is cleaner, the candles are brighter, and the benches have cushions thick enough to suggest that rank may at least protect the royal backside. Behind the high table hangs a heavy woven tapestry showing hunters' forests and impossible flowers blooming in a season that clearly has nothing to do with the frozen world outside. The tapestry is decoration, but it is also insulation. Thick fabric hung over stone helps soften the bite of a wall that otherwise feels like a slab of captured winter. The most comfortable royal chambers use textiles everywhere they can: wall hangings, bed curtains, rugs, cushions, cloaks, blankets. Medieval luxury is often simply the art of putting enough layers between human skin and cold masonry. You take a place farther down the hall, close enough to watch. Servants carry in food on wooden platters. There is coarse bread, roasted meat pottage, thick with peas, and onions, smoked fish, and small pies whose contents remain mysterious even after you stare at them. No one can quite agree whether every medieval pie is meant to be eaten entirely or whether some crusts serve mainly as containers, but you decide not to challenge anything that has survived the kitchen fires. Before the meal begins, hands are washed. A servant approaches the king with a basin and pours warm, scented water over his fingers. This is practical hygiene, courtly manners, and ritual all at once. Clean hands matter when knives and fingers do much of the work at table. Forks exist in some places and periods, but they are not the universal companion you might expect. A man of rank may use a knife, spoon, bread, and his own carefully washed hands.
The water is scented with herbs.
Rosemary, sage, or perhaps another fragrant plant has been steeped into it, partly because pleasant smells are believed to support health. Medieval people often connect foul odors with illness, though their explanations differ from what you would hear from a physician centuries later. Some swear that sweet herbs, vinegar, or aromatic woods guard the body against unhealthy air. Even now, it is hard to tell whether a particular household follows such habits from medicine, superstition, fashion, or simply the perfectly reasonable desire not to smell like a stable. The king sits. The rest follow, according to rank. Your shaggy dog, who apparently recognizes no social hierarchy except proximity to meat slips beneath a bench. Dinner begins slowly. Bread trenchers absorb juices beneath portions of meat. Ale is poured into cups. The king may receive wine, perhaps warmed or spiced, depending on custom and supply. In cold weather, spiced drinks have obvious appeal. Cinnamon, cloves, pepper, nutmeg, and other imported spices can be costly, and using them is a quiet declaration that the royal household possesses money connections and a steward willing to argue with merchants. You warm your hands around a cup. The heat seeps into your fingers. For the first time since entering the castle, you feel your shoulders lower. Around you, conversation remains muted. Winter evenings do not necessarily make the hall silent, but the heavy air seems to soften everything. A spoon touches a bowl. Someone tears bread. Logs settle in the hearth. One of the guards near the door yawns with the deep sincerity of a man who has been standing in armor since noon. At the high table, an attendant keeps close watch on the king's cup. Food and drink around rulers can become tangled in elaborate precautions. Tasters, trusted servants, covered vessels, and careful serving practices may appear, depending on the court, the ruler, and the political mood. Some swear that a royal cup must never leave trustworthy hands. Those who tell the tale never fully agree how much of this comes from genuine fear and how much from ceremony. For tonight, however, the danger seems less dramatic. The king's greatest enemy may simply be cold gravy. Servants move quickly to prevent it. Hot dishes must cross long halls in winter air, and even a royal roast cools faster than dignity would prefer. Platters are covered, sauces arrive in warmed vessels, the kitchen fires remain fierce enough that the cooks probably enjoy the rare medieval privilege of complaining about being too warm. You eat pottage from a shared bowl near your end of the table. It is thick, salty, and far better than your frozen fingers had expected. Beside it, a piece of smoked fish carries the flavor of the winter storehouse. Food preserved by salting, smoking, drying, or curing helps sustain households when fresh supplies are scarce. Great castles require enormous reserves, barrels of grain, salted meat cheese, dried peas, ale firewood, and fodder for horses. A king may own vast lands, yet dinner in January still depends on what someone had the wisdom to store in October. As the meal continues, servants add logs to the hearth. Sparks rise. A faint orange glow catches on the edges of metal cups and belt buckles. The dog beneath the bench finally receives a scrap from someone who pretends not to notice him. You suspect this is how he has built his entire career. The king pulls his fur-lined mantle closer. This small movement is easy to miss, but it says much. Even near a royal fire, clothing remains part of heating. Wool tunics, linen underlayers, fur linings, caps, gloves, and heavy cloaks trap warmth around the body. Rooms are not heated evenly. Heat gathers close to flames and fades quickly toward doors, windows, and walls. The evening meal is therefore not merely supper. It is preparation. Warm food fills the stomach, warm drink restores the hands, fire dries damp cloth. Servants observe the king's condition. Bedchamber attendants will soon move ahead to make certain fires are tended, shutters checked, bedding arranged, and candles prepared. Beyond the hall doors, frost continues to whiten the courtyard. Inside, the last dishes are cleared. The king finishes his drink, wipes his fingers, and rises. Benches scrape gently against the floor. You stand with everyone else as the household begins to change shape around him, no longer gathering for food, but preparing to follow him deeper into the castle, toward the quieter rooms where the long winter night will truly begin. The king's movement away from the high table pulls the room gently after him, as though the whole great hall is attached to his cloak by invisible threads. Conversation thins. Servants collect cups and trenchers. The fire still burns strongly behind you, but the warmth begins to loosen its grip almost the moment you turn toward the passage beyond the dais. You follow. The shaggy dog follows too, of course. A narrow doorway opens behind the hanging tapestry, revealing a corridor so much darker than the hall that your eyes need a moment to adjust. Two servants go ahead with beeswax candles set in metal holders. Their flames are small, steady only when the air is still, and every opening door makes them lean sideways, as if bowing to the draught. The king walks at an unhurried pace. Around him, the household becomes smaller. This is one of the quiet truths of royal life. The closer you come to the king's sleeping place, the fewer people are permitted to continue. A great hall may hold retainers, clerks, guests, musicians, messengers, guards, and hungry dogs with excellent instincts. The inner rooms belong to a narrower circle. At the first chamber, several men stop. A chamberlain speaks softly with an officer near the door. Names are known, duties are understood. Access itself is a kind of privilege, and in a royal household, standing near the king can mean political influence as well as the honor of carrying a candle or folding a cloak. You pass beneath a low stone arch. The temperature drops. The corridor walls are thick, but thickness does not guarantee comfort. Cold seems to live inside the masonry. Your fingertips begin to cool again, even though supper ended only minutes ago. The smell changes too. The great hall smelled of roasting meat and smoke. Here you catch wax, damp stone wool, old timber, and the faint herbal scent of rushes crushed under many shoes. Along one wall, iron brackets support candles at intervals. They do not illuminate the corridor so much as create islands of light, separated by long stretches of shadow. A servant trims a blackened wick with small snuffers. Candle care is constant work. A neglected wick smokes gutters and wastes expensive wax, which is not something a steward appreciates. The king pauses near a small chapel door. His chaplain is waiting. This is not yet the final prayer before sleep, only one of the many small devotional pauses that can shape a ruler's day. The chaplain murmurs a few words. The king inclines his head toward a painted saint set into a shallow niche. Beside the figure hangs a tiny object wrapped in cloth. Someone whispers that it contains a fragment of a holy bone. Someone else believes it may be a splinter from a saint's staff. No one can quite agree whether the relic is what the old inventory claims, but everyone treats it with sufficient respect to avoid discovering otherwise. You lower your head with the rest. The dog sits. For once he looks deeply pious, though you suspect he is simply waiting for another piece of meat. The procession moves again. A wooden door opens ahead, bound with broad iron straps. The hinges groan softly. Doors like this do more than mark rooms. They separate degrees of access, security, warmth, and status. Each threshold carries you farther from the public castle and closer to the king as a private human being. A clerk remains behind at the next chamber, then two guards, then several household officers. The group is becoming quieter. You notice how much ceremony can be hidden inside simple movements. A servant receives the king's outer mantle. Another takes his gloves. A third carries a candle. Nobody bumps shoulders or fumbles in obvious panic. In a well-run household, every action has been repeated until it appears effortless. The mantle is passed carefully, rather than tossed over a bench. Fur is valuable and dampness can ruin comfort quickly. Somewhere nearby, another servant will inspect it, brush away moisture, and hang it where it can dry without scorching. This, too, is royal winter survival. Not grand magic, just constant maintenance. You enter a smaller withdrawing room where a charcoal brazier gives off modest heat. The ceiling is lower here, making the chamber easier to warm than the enormous hall. A tapestry covers one wall. A bench sits near the brazier. A small table holds a jug, 2 cups, and a folded cloth. The king stops briefly. An attendant kneels to remove a trace of mud from the edge of his shoe. You glance at your own boots and decide that kingship has certain advantages after all. Outside the room, a guard shifts his spear from one hand to the other. Another checks the latch of the door behind the group. Heavy oak doors are useful against intruders, but tonight their more immediate enemy is the wind. A thin draught still finds its way beneath one. A servant pushes a rolled strip of cloth along the gap. It is not elegant. It works. Medieval comfort often survives through such small inventions: wool stuffed into cracks, shutters pulled tight, tapestries hung against walls, rushes spread over cold floors, benches dragged closer to heat. The castle is always being persuaded not to behave like the frozen hill from which its stones were taken. As you leave the withdrawing room, bells sound faintly somewhere beyond the inner wall. The hour is growing late. The corridors are quieter now. Kitchen noise fades behind you. The clang of the gatehouse becomes distant. Even the great hall seems like another world. Ahead, another pair of doors waits. These are narrower, heavier, and watched by men who do not look sleepy. One holds a ring of iron keys. The other studies everyone who approaches. You are entering the part of the castle where proximity matters. Beyond these thresholds lie the rooms in which the king changes clothes, receives trusted companions, prays, rests, and eventually sleeps. But not everyone who began the evening beside him will see them. The king steps through. The dog slips through too. You follow just before the door closes, leaving the fire-lit noise of the public castle behind and entering the guarded hush of the royal night. The door closes behind you with a heavy wooden thud, and at once the castle seems to shrink. The distant hall, the clatter of dishes, the voices of guards, even the barking from the outer yard, become muffled behind layers of stone and oak. You are now inside the private rooms of the king, where warmth, silence, and privacy are all treated as precious things, though none can ever be completely guaranteed. A servant lifts his candle. The bedchamber waits beyond another arch. You step inside and immediately notice that it is smaller than imagination might suggest. This is not a cavernous hall built to impress ambassadors. A winter sleeping chamber works better when its ceiling is lower, its doors fewer, and its walls softened by cloth. Even royalty benefits from having less air to heat. The chamber smells of beeswax, wood smoke, wool, and faintly of dried herbs. Rushes cover much of the stone floor. They crunch quietly beneath your boots, keeping your soles from touching bare flagstones that seem cold enough to preserve fish. Fresh rushes may be scattered with rosemary, lavender, sweet woodruff, or whatever fragrant plants the household can obtain. Older rushes collect dust crumbs and the occasional unwelcome insect, which is one reason they must be renewed. A king may command a kingdom.
His floor still requires sweeping.
Along the walls hang thick tapestries. One shows a hunting party pursuing a stag through an impossibly green forest. Another depicts nights beneath a blue sky filled with golden stars. Their colors are richer in candlelight than they would appear during the grey winter day. Yet these hangings are not merely decoration. You move close enough to one to feel the difference. Behind it lies freezing stone. In front of it, the air is slightly less sharp. Heavy textiles create a barrier between the room and walls that have spent months absorbing winter cold. Some royal households even hang fabric around entire sections of chambers, creating a softer inner skin inside the stone shell. You begin to understand why medieval wealth often looks like cloth. Cloth on walls, cloth over benches, cloth around beds, cloth beneath cloaks. If you possess enough wool, linen, fur, and tapestry, perhaps you can eventually convince February to leave you alone. A fireplace occupies one side of the chamber. Its fire is smaller than the blaze in the great hall, but far more useful, because you can actually stand near it without competing with 100 people. 2 logs settle into glowing embers. A servant kneels and adds another piece of split oak. Sparks climb briefly into the chimney. The chimney itself is a luxury worth noticing. Earlier medieval buildings often struggle with smoke from open hearths, but in wealthy castles, fireplaces with flues increasingly allow heat to be placed directly against a wall. They do not create perfect warmth. Drafts still pull air across the chamber, and much heat escapes upward. Still, your hands are grateful. You hold them toward the flames. Across the room, wooden shutters cover the narrow window openings. Glass may exist in important chambers, depending on the castle region and period, but even glazed windows offer little protection compared with modern panes. Shutters matter enormously. One attendant presses a hand along their edge. He finds a small draught. Another servant arrives with folded cloth and pushes it into the gap. There is no ceremony. There is only winter. Near the fireplace stands a carved wooden chair with a cushion. A chest sits against the opposite wall, secured with iron fittings. Such chests hold clothing, linen, documents, valuables, and sometimes several categories at once, because medieval furniture tends to work harder than its descendants. On a small table rests a basin. Beside it lies a comb, a folded cloth, a cup, and a little container that may hold scented oil or salve for dry skin. Cold weather cracks hands and lips regardless of rank. Herbal preparations using animal fat, beeswax oils, and plants such as rose or violet may be applied for comfort. Some remedies are sensible, others wander into territory where medicine, tradition, and hope become difficult to separate. A small bundle hangs near the bed. You ask quietly what it is. An attendant tells you it contains dried herbs believed to encourage peaceful sleep. Another servant mutters that it keeps away nightmares. Some swear that certain plants placed near a sleeper can repel troublesome spirits or prevent disturbing dreams. No one can quite agree whether this particular bundle is medicine superstition or simply something the king's grandmother insisted upon many years ago. Nobody removes it. That may be the safest policy. Your shaggy dog wanders toward the fireplace and circles 3 times before collapsing onto the rushes. He has solved medieval heating more efficiently than most architects. You look toward the great bed. It stands raised above the floor on a wooden frame surrounded by hanging curtains that are presently tied back. The fabric makes it appear almost like a small chamber within the chamber. You do not yet examine what lies beneath the coverings. That is another world of ropes, mattresses, feathers, sheets, blankets, and carefully arranged layers. For now, what matters is the room around it. A servant checks the candle stands. Another inspects the hearth. A third moves a bench away from the coldest wall. The king enters behind you without his heavy outer mantle, now wearing layers better suited to the private chamber. His shoulders seem less ceremonial. He looks for a moment less like the figure stamped on a coin and more like a tired man who has spent a long winter day surrounded by petitions, meals, priests, guards, and people who apparently require decisions about everything. He approaches the fire. His hands extend toward it. No one speaks for several breaths. Outside, wind presses softly against the shutters. The castle answers with tiny noises, timber contracting hinges, settling flames shifting in the hearth. Somewhere far below, an iron door closes. The monastery bell sounds again beyond the walls, faint and slow through the night air. You glance around the chamber once more. The tapestries, the rushes, the shuttered windows, the oak chest, the candles, the carefully fed fire. Nothing here defeats winter. Everything merely weakens it. And in the center of this carefully defended pocket of warmth, the royal bed waits for the servants to begin the most important preparation of the night. The servants move toward the bed with the quiet concentration of craftsmen approaching a familiar task. You follow them.
The royal bed
Is already impressive from a distance, but up close it becomes less like a single piece of furniture and more like a carefully constructed machine for trapping warmth. Thick wooden posts rise at each corner, supporting a canopy overhead. Curtains hang around the frame in heavy folds tied back for now. Beneath them, layer after layer waits to be arranged before the king can lie down. One servant kneels beside the frame and presses a hand against the ropes stretched beneath the mattress. Yes, ropes. Before modern metal springs, many beds rely on a network of cords or woven supports to hold the bedding above the floor. These ropes can loosen over time, especially beneath heavy mattresses, and must occasionally be tightened. A man pulls one cord firmly. Another checks the opposite side. You hear the faint creak of wood under tension. There is an old expression about sleeping tightly that some later generations like to connect with these bed ropes. No one can quite agree whether the famous phrase truly comes from this practice, but the idea is pleasing enough. A loose bed sags, while a well-tightened one offers a more respectable night. The shaggy dog watches from beside the hearth. He appears entirely satisfied with the rush-covered floor and seems confused that humans require engineering. On top of the ropes lies the first mattress. It is not the soft feather mattress reserved for the uppermost layer. This lower bedding may be filled with straw, wool, coarse flock, or other material that provides support while separating the sleeper from the cold air beneath the frame. A servant presses both hands into it. Another smooths the surface. Straw bedding has to be maintained. It can flatten, absorb dampness, or provide shelter for insects that have no appreciation for royal rank. Wealthier households replace or refresh filling more often, but even a king lives in a world where fleas regard social hierarchy as an interesting suggestion. You decide not to inspect the mattress too closely. Above this lower layer comes something softer. Two attendants lift a thick feather bed and settle it across the frame. It billows slightly as it lands. Feathers, especially goose or other waterfowl down, can create exceptional insulation. A fine feather bed is expensive because it requires a tremendous quantity of carefully gathered filling. It is one of those forms of luxury that does not glitter like gold, but becomes deeply persuasive once winter arrives. You press your palm against one corner when nobody seems to be looking. It sinks. For the first time tonight, you understand why a ruler might forgive a drafty castle. The feather bed is shaken and distributed carefully. If the filling gathers into one end, the king may spend half the night sliding into an uncomfortable hollow, which is hardly the posture expected of a divinely appointed monarch. Next come linen sheets. These are cleaner and finer than anything most villagers would own in quantity. Linen requires labor, from the growing and processing of flax through spinning and weaving, and good household linen represents serious wealth. A servant spreads the lower sheet. Another pulls it smooth. The fabric looks almost pale gold in candlelight. Clean sheets are not necessarily changed every night. Laundering large quantities of linen requires water fuel, labor, drying space, and suitable weather. Winter makes all of this more troublesome. Instead, bedding is aired, brushed, warmed, and periodically washed according to household custom. A small pouch of dried herbs is placed near the head of the bed. Lavender, perhaps, maybe sweet marjoram. Some swear that aromatic plants help bring restful dreams. Others believe certain herbs can discourage insects or protect sleepers from harmful nighttime influences. Even now it is hard to tell whether such practices survive because they work, because they smell pleasant, or because nobody wishes to be the servant who removes the king's lucky sleeping herbs and then watches him dream badly. Pillows arrive next. Not one, several. One is stuffed firmly enough to support the head. Another is softer. A long bolster lies across the upper portion of the bed. Sleeping positions can differ from modern habits. Medieval images sometimes show people resting somewhat elevated rather than lying entirely flat, supported by pillows and bolsters. Health beliefs may encourage this, particularly after eating, and an upright posture also feels sensible in smoky rooms where breathing can be uncomfortable. You glance toward the chimney. A thread of smoke escapes the hearth and drifts upward. Perhaps the pillows know something. Then come wool blankets. They are heavy. Two attendants spread the first one evenly across the linen. Another follows. Wool remains one of the great defences against medieval winter because it traps air, retains warmth, and can still provide insulation when slightly damp. The king's blankets are finer than those of ordinary people, but the principle is identical, layer upon layer. Warmth created not through machinery but patience. Finally, fur coverings are brought forward. The room becomes noticeably quieter. These are valuable pieces. A lining or cover made from squirrel, marten, ermine, or other prized fur may serve both comfort and display. The exact type depends on wealth, region, law, availability, and status. Sumptuary rules in some places even attempt to control who is entitled to wear particular materials because apparently medieval governments also discover the eternal joy of regulating clothing. The fur is spread carefully over the bed. You run your eyes across its dense surface. This is the final barrier between the king and the air of the chamber. Not the stone walls, not the fire, not the shutters, the bed itself. The entire structure is designed as a warm island, raised from the floor, supported by layered mattresses wrapped in wool and fur, eventually enclosed by curtains. It creates a smaller environment within the cold chamber. The attendants stand back. One adjusts a pillow by less than an inch. Another smooths a wrinkle that you had not noticed. A third checks the cords holding the curtains. The king watches from near the hearth, warming his hands while they finish. There is something surprisingly ordinary about the scene. A monarch may possess crowns, armies, clerks, seals, castles, forests, and men who bow whenever he enters a room. But before he can sleep, someone still has to make the bed. The dog rises, stretches, and looks toward the feather mattress with sudden interest. A servant points firmly at the floor. The dog returns to the hearth. Royal protocol survives another night. Outside, wind brushes against the shutters. Inside, the bed now waits beneath its carefully prepared layers, soft and deep and almost warm. Almost. Because the servants are not finished fighting the winter yet. The bed is made, but no one in the chamber behaves as though the work is finished. A prepared bed is only the beginning. The servants now turn their attention to the problem that has shaped nearly every movement of the evening cold. The fire burns steadily, the shutters are closed, the tapestries hang thick against the stone, and yet the air near the floor still carries a sharp winter bite. You can feel it around your boots. One attendant crosses to the hearth and lifts a long-handled warming pan. It looks almost like an oversized metal plate with a lid fixed to a wooden handle. Inside, glowing embers have been placed carefully. The servant carries it toward the bed and slips it between the sheets. You instinctively step closer. The pan moves slowly beneath the linen, warming one area and then another. This requires care. Leave hot embers in one place too long and the solution to a cold bed may become a considerably larger problem involving smoke, shouting, and the king standing outside in his night clothes. No one wants that. The servant keeps the pan moving. Warmth spreads through the sheets. The faint scent of heated linen rises into the room. Some warming pans use hot coals, others heated stones or metal containers, depending on place and period. In wealthy households, attendants may prepare the bed shortly before the sleeper enters it so that the first contact with the sheets is not like embracing a frozen altar. You touch the edge of the mattress. It is noticeably warmer now. The shaggy dog lifts his head from the hearth and watches with deep, professional interest. If dogs could request warming pans, you suspect civilization would become much more complicated. Another servant approaches carrying smooth stones wrapped in cloth. They have been heated near the fire. One is placed near the foot of the bed beneath the coverings. Another is kept ready nearby. Heated bricks, stones, bottles, or similar objects can provide local warmth when carefully wrapped so that they do not burn the skin. The king's feet, it seems, receive particular attention. Cold extremities are a familiar misery in winter castles. Fingers and toes cool quickly. Thick socks, soft shoes, fur linings, warmed bedding, and proximity to the hearth all help. A servant kneels beside a chest and removes a pair of thick woolen stockings. The weave is fine. They are warmed briefly near the hearth before being offered to the king. He sits in the carved chair and allows an attendant to help with them. It looks ceremonial from a distance. Up close, it is simply a tired man putting on warmer clothes. You rub your own toes inside your boots and feel a small flare of jealousy. Near the fireplace, another attendant checks a ceramic vessel filled with warm water. The king may use it for washing before bed, though the washing is modest. A full bath at this hour would require tremendous quantities of heated water labor, carrying and preparation. Instead, hands and face can be washed. A cloth is dipped. The king wipes smoke and dust from his skin. The water contains a faint herbal scent, rosemary perhaps. Some swear that warm water infused with herbs strengthens the body before sleep. Others believe certain plants keep away chills or bad dreams. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the herbs are chosen for medicine, fragrance, or tradition. The result at least smells pleasant. Another servant checks the door. A draft slips beneath it. The same rolled strip of wool you noticed earlier has shifted slightly. He pushes it firmly back into place. Such tiny actions matter. A chamber can have the finest bed in Christendom, but if wind pours through every gap, the king will spend the night discovering new ways to regret architecture. The shutters receive another inspection. One latch is tightened. A folded cloth is pressed into the corner where cold air sneaks through. At the hearth, logs are rearranged to create a long, steady burn rather than a bright blaze that will collapse too quickly. Firewood must last deep into the night, but leaving a large unattended fire carries risks. A servant studies the embers as carefully as a treasurer studies coins. Too little fuel means cold. Too much means danger. Medieval comfort is often a negotiation between freezing and accidentally setting something expensive on fire. The king moves closer to the bed. An attendant offers him a fur-lined night mantle. It is lighter than the heavy cloak he wore across the courtyard, but thick enough to hold warmth around his shoulders before he enters the bedding. You notice that even the furniture has been moved with winter in mind. The chair is close to the hearth. The small table is within reach of the bed. A cup of drink sits upon it. A little warmed ale or wine may be offered before sleep. sometimes flavored with spices or herbs. Medieval physicians often discussed foods and drinks in terms of qualities such as hot, cold, moist, and dry, believing bodily balance essential to health. Winter itself is cold and damp, so warm foods, warming spices, and heated drinks can feel medically appropriate as well as comforting. The king takes a small sip. Steam rises faintly from the cup. You can smell spice. Perhaps cinnamon. Perhaps cloves. Expensive ingredients traveling hundreds or thousands of miles have ended up here in a cold stone room for the humble purpose of making one man feel warmer before bed. Outside the shutters, wind rises. A low whistle passes along the wall. The candle flames tremble. Every servant pauses for the smallest moment, listening. Then they continue. One checks the blanket. One touches the warmed stone. One moves the warming pan farther down the bed. One adds a final log to the fire. Their work is repetitive, almost hypnotic. Check, warm, cover, close, feed, guard. Nothing dramatic, nothing magical, just dozens of small acts of attention. You begin to see that royal comfort does not come from a single luxurious object. It comes from people, people carrying wood, people heating water, people tightening shutters, people warming sheets, people tending fires while everyone else sleeps. The king receives the benefit, but the warmth of the royal bed is built by many cold hands. At last, the warming pan is removed. The servant opens the sheets slightly and tests them with the back of his hand. He nods. The bedding is ready. The king rises from the chair. The dog shifts closer to the hearth, and around the bed the heavy curtains wait to be drawn, ready to create an even smaller refuge from the freezing castle beyond. The curtains are drawn slowly around the bed. One servant begins on the left, another on the right, and the heavy fabric moves along its rings with a soft, rasping sound. Candlelight disappears behind one fold, then another, until the king's enormous bed becomes a small enclosed chamber within the larger room. You step closer before the final curtain closes. At once the reason for all this fabric becomes obvious. The air inside feels different. Not hot, certainly. No medieval winter bed is going to offer the cheerful warmth of a modern heated bedroom. But the curtains reduce the movement of cold air. They trap some of the warmth rising from the mattress, the blankets, the warmed stones, and eventually the sleeper's own body. The difference is modest. In January, modest differences become precious. A draught that crosses an open chamber can steal warmth quickly, especially when it slips through shutter gaps and beneath oak doors. Curtains break that movement. They create a little pocket of still air around the mattress. It is almost a room inside a room. A tiny kingdom where the king's greatest political ambition is simply to keep his toes warm until dawn. The bed hangings are thick enough that you can barely see the shapes beyond them. Depending on the household, they may be made from wool, linen, silk, or richly woven fabric. A royal bed can display heraldic colors, embroidered devices, decorative borders, or expensive imported material. A bed, after all, is not always private furniture. It can be a statement. Important visitors may sometimes be received near it. Ceremonies can occur around it. Births, illnesses, councils, and even diplomatic conversations may take place in chambers dominated by such beds. Yet tonight, the grand symbolism fades beneath the practical purpose of cloth. Warmth, privacy, darkness. You run your fingertips over the curtain edge. The fabric is heavy and slightly rough. It blocks your view of the fireplace almost entirely. This is helpful for sleep, but it introduces another problem: ventilation. The same curtains that protect the sleeper from drafts can make the air inside the bed feel close and stale. Breath warms the enclosed space. Smoke drifting through the chamber can linger. If several people share the bed, the atmosphere may become even thicker. No one can quite agree whether medieval sleepers regularly closed every curtain completely through the night. Practices vary by period, household season, and personal preference. Some images show beds tightly enclosed, while other arrangements allow gaps. Tonight, the attendants leave a narrow opening, enough to reduce the draft, enough to allow air, enough perhaps to prevent the king from waking, convinced that royal dignity has finally been defeated by his own upholstery. The shaggy dog wanders toward the gap. A servant blocks him gently with one foot. The dog sits. His expression suggests a serious disagreement over property rights. You move around the bed and notice another advantage of curtains: privacy. This is much more important than you might expect. The king sleeps in private rooms, but private does not mean alone. Servants remain nearby. Guards wait beyond doors. Chamber officers move in and out. A physician might be summoned, a priest may enter. Trusted attendants may sleep close enough to respond if needed. Within such a crowded household, curtains provide the nearest thing to walls around the sleeper. They allow dressing, undressing, resting, talking quietly, or simply closing the world away for a few hours. In a castle where nearly every movement of the monarch is observed by somebody, drawing curtains can become one of the rare acts that makes a king temporarily invisible. The symbolism is almost comforting. Outside the curtain, he is ruler. Inside, he is simply tired. An attendant adjusts the cord holding the opening. Another smooths the lower edge so that it does not drag too heavily against the rushes. The fabric reaches almost to the floor, helping prevent low drafts from curling beneath the bed. You crouch slightly. Cold air still slips across the stone beneath the frame. The raised mattress keeps the sleeper above it. This is why every element works together: the high bed, the ropes, the lower mattress, the feather layer, the wool, the fur, the warmed stone, the curtains. None creates perfect comfort alone. Together they produce something far more valuable: a tolerable night. Near the hearth, a servant lowers the fire slightly. Now that the bed is enclosed, too much heat is unnecessary and sparks must be controlled. The candles nearest the bed are also moved farther away. Heavy cloth and open flame make an unfortunate partnership. Even a sleepy household knows this. A candle placed too close to a curtain can turn royal bedtime into an event that chroniclers would describe with considerably more excitement than you want tonight. The servant checks the candle distance twice. You approve. The king sits on the edge of the mattress. It sinks beneath his weight. He reaches toward the curtain and draws it a little closer around himself. For a moment, you see only his hand against the fabric. Then the opening narrows. The room immediately feels quieter. The curtain muffles small noises from within. Likewise, sounds from the chamber become softer for the sleeper. The crackle of logs, the shuffle of servants, the faint movement of guards in the passage. All of it now seems farther away. Some swear that enclosing the bed also offers protection from spirits' bad air or troublesome nighttime influences, especially when blessed objects, herbs, or religious symbols are kept nearby. Medieval sleeping customs often mix sensible practicality with beliefs that are harder to separate from fear and tradition. A scrap of blessed cloth might be tied near a bedpost. A small cross may hang within reach. An herb pouch may rest beneath a pillow. Even now it is hard to tell whether such things comfort the body, the mind, or both. Perhaps that distinction matters less at midnight. You stand beside the nearly closed curtains. Warm air gathers faintly behind them. The fire burns lower. The beeswax candles have shortened. The dog has surrendered his campaign for the royal mattress and curled again beside the hearth. Beyond the shutters, the wind continues moving across towers, roofs, battlements, and frozen fields. Inside this small fabric enclosure, however, the king is protected from much of its reach. Not perfectly. Nothing in this castle is perfect. But for a few dark hours, wool, fur, wood, wax, embers, and human labor have created a little island of warmth in the middle of winter. And beyond that island, other people remain awake, closer than you might imagine. You remain beside the curtained bed and listen. The king is hidden now, but the chamber is not empty. That may be the greatest surprise of all. Modern ideas of sleep often begin with privacy. A closed bedroom door, a quiet room, perhaps one other person nearby. Here, in a royal castle, privacy is measured differently. The king possesses more personal space than almost anyone else in the kingdom. Yet even he rarely sleeps completely alone. Around the bed, people settle into their places. A trusted chamber servant remains close enough to hear if the king calls. Another checks the fire. A third gathers discarded clothing, folding each piece carefully before placing it inside an oak chest. Linen, wool, fur belts, gloves, and night garments are not left scattered casually across the rushes. Fine clothing is expensive, and preserving it is part of household management. The iron key turns in the chest lock. You hear the small click clearly. One chamber officer takes possession of the key. That alone tells you something important. To serve near the sleeping king is not ordinary domestic work. Access to his body, clothes, bed, private conversations, and vulnerable hours carries enormous trust. A servant who helps a king dress may hear matters that never reach the great hall. A man who stands beside the bed at midnight may know whether the king is ill, restless, frightened, angry, or simply snoring with enough determination to disturb diplomacy in the next room. Some royal attendants build considerable influence from this proximity. A request whispered while helping with a sleeve can sometimes travel farther than a petition delivered formally before a council. No one can quite agree whether every famous court favorite truly gains power through such intimate access. But rulers have always been easier to approach before the machinery of government fully wakes. Tonight, however, politics is mostly asleep. One attendant spreads a simple pallet near the wall. It consists of a stuffed mattress placed low to the floor with a wool covering and a small pillow. Not everyone near the king receives a carved bed. Rank follows you, even into sleep. The officer closest to the monarch may have a proper bedstead or comfortable pallet. Lesser attendants may rest on benches, mattresses, cushions, or bedding laid over rushes. Guards beyond the chamber may sit through part of the night before changing watch. You glance down at the cold floor. Suddenly, your own imagined mattress seems luxurious. The shaggy dog is still beside the hearth. He raises his head as one servant arranges a cushion near the foot of the royal bed. For one glorious moment, the animal appears convinced that this has been provided for him. It has not. The cushion belongs to an attendant. The dog settles onto the rushes again with the expression of a nobleman denied his inheritance. Dogs themselves are hardly unusual in elite sleeping spaces. Small companion dogs may sleep close to noble owners. Hunting dogs and larger animals are more likely to remain elsewhere, yet castle life does not always respect neat, modern boundaries between human rooms and animal spaces. A favored dog can receive remarkable privileges. Some sleep on cushions, some enter private chambers, some appear in illuminated manuscripts sitting beneath dining tables or beside beds. Some swear that dogs provide warmth as well as companionship, although you suspect the dog would describe this arrangement as humans providing warmth to him. Cats, too, may move through domestic spaces, especially where grain stores encourage mice. Whether a particular king tolerates animals in his chamber depends on habit, taste, and household custom. Tonight, your shaggy companion seems determined to test those limits. He inches closer to the bed. A servant looks at him. The dog freezes. The servant looks away. The dog inches closer again. Royal security has encountered a patient enemy. Beyond the chamber door stand armed guards. They're close enough to respond quickly but far enough to preserve some sense of privacy. A king's sleeping chamber sits inside layers of protection. Trusted servants nearest him. Officers controlling access, guards in adjoining rooms, more guards along corridors, and watchmen farther outward toward the gates and walls. But security is not the only reason people stay nearby. The king may need assistance during the night. He may require water. The fire may need tending. A candle may be lit. A physician might be summoned if illness develops. A priest may be called if the king becomes seriously unwell. Even ordinary bodily needs can require servants, especially in a culture where rank shapes who handles almost every domestic task. Near one wall stands a covered chamber pot. It is practical, unavoidable, and considerably less romantic than the ballads. You decide. Medieval poets have been very selective. A servant positions it discreetly within reach. Sleeping through a winter night without leaving the chamber is preferable to wandering freezing corridors in darkness. Another attendant places a cup of drink on the bedside table. A small pitcher stands beside it. Everything the king may reasonably need before morning is arranged within a compact circle. Meanwhile, the wider household begins its own sleep. You can imagine it beyond these walls. Servants curling beneath wool blankets, pages sleeping near their masters, guards resting between watches, kitchen workers finally leaving the heat of the ovens. Stable hands bedding down after checking horses. In crowded castles, sharing sleeping spaces is normal. Travelling servants may sleep several to a room. Beds themselves may sometimes be shared by people who are not married and have no romantic relationship at all. Friends, relatives, travellers, servants, and companions can sleep side by side because beds are valuable, rooms are limited, and warmth is welcome. The idea would not automatically carry the same meaning it might in your own century. Hospitality sometimes means literally making room beneath the blankets. At inns, travellers may find themselves sharing beds with strangers. At monasteries, guest houses provide communal sleeping arrangements. In noble households, servants may sleep in chambers belonging to their masters. Privacy is a luxury, but warmth is a necessity. You hear movement behind the royal curtain. An attendant steps closer. "Water," the king says softly. The cup is passed through the gap. There is no elaborate ceremony now, only a hand, a cup, a quiet "thank you." Then the curtain closes again. For a moment the king is invisible. Around him the attendants lower their voices almost to whispers. One removes his shoes before settling on the pallet. Another keeps his outer garment close, ready to rise quickly. The chamber grows still. The beeswax candle nearest you has burned nearly halfway down. Its flame flickers against the tapestry. Outside, a guard clears his throat. Farther away, somewhere down the corridor, an oak door opens and shuts. The dog finally finds a position that satisfies him and curls into a brown circle beside the hearth. You understand now that royal sleep is strangely communal. The king is protected by curtains, rank, ritual, and guarded doors, yet his night depends on other people remaining close. They listen, they wait, they tend, they sleep lightly. And as the chamber settles deeper into darkness, the space around the bed fills not with solitude, but with the quiet breathing of a household arranged around one sleeping man. The chamber has nearly fallen silent when the chaplain returns. You hear him before you see him, not because he makes much noise, but because the iron latch lifts with a soft click and the nearest attendant rises at once. The door opens just enough to admit a narrow blade of colder air, followed by a man carrying a small candle and a leather-bound book pressed against his chest. The king's curtains stir. No one speaks loudly. Night prayer in a royal chamber is not a grand public ceremony. There are no trumpets, no crowds, no banners snapping above a procession. Instead, the ritual becomes smaller and more intimate as the hour grows late. The chaplain stands beside the bed. You move closer to the wall. His candle illuminates a little silver cross hanging near one bedpost. Beside it is a tiny reliquary no larger than your palm, shaped like a miniature shrine. Its metal surface catches the flame. Inside, according to the household, rests a fragment associated with a saint. Exactly which saint depends on whom you ask. One attendant believes it is part of Saint Martin's garment. Another whispers that an older inventory names a completely different holy man. No one can quite agree whether the object has been correctly identified for the last 100 years, but uncertainty does not reduce the reverence surrounding it. The chaplain begins the prayers. You lower your head. Medieval nights carry particular spiritual weight. Darkness is not merely the absence of daylight, it is the time when ordinary boundaries seem thinner, when dreams arrive, when illness can worsen, when storms sound closer, and when the mind becomes more willing to imagine what might be moving beyond the shuttered window. For a king, this uneasiness can be magnified. He carries responsibilities that do not disappear when the candles are extinguished. Enemies exist. Disease exists. Political betrayal exists. So do beliefs about demons, omens, restless spirits, divine warnings, and dangerous dreams. Prayer offers structure, familiar words, repeated gestures, the sign of the cross. A verse remembered from childhood, a saint invoked by name. You watch the curtain open slightly. The king's hand appears. The chaplain gives him the small cross. He holds it for a moment. A ruler may command armies by day and still sleep with a holy object close enough to touch in darkness. This is not unusual. Relics, blessed medals, crosses, pilgrim badges, prayer texts, and small devotional objects travel with medieval people through remarkably ordinary moments. A knight may carry a saint's token into battle. A merchant may pin a pilgrim badge to a hat. A woman may keep a blessed object near childbirth. A king may place protection beside his bed. Some swear that certain relics guard specifically against sudden death during sleep. Others are believed to protect against fever nightmares, storms, or the malice of unseen forces. Whether every ruler believes, each claim literally is impossible to know. Even now it is hard to tell where faith ends and habit begins. You understand the feeling. There is comfort in familiar objects when the room is dark. The chaplain finishes one prayer and opens his book. The pages are vellum pale and slightly uneven. Ink forms dense black lines decorated here and there with red marks. Perhaps an ink-stained scribe copied these words years ago in a monastery room where another winter wind rattled another set of shutters. A small bookmark of woven thread hangs between the pages. The chaplain reads softly. His voice blends with the fire. The dog beside the hearth lifts one ear and then lowers it again. He appears confident that his soul can wait until morning. When the reading ends, the chaplain closes the book. But the ritual is not finished. An attendant brings a tiny cloth pouch. You recognize the dried herb bundle seen earlier near the bed. Tonight, however, you learn that its purpose is more complicated than simple fragrance. It contains lavender, perhaps, and rosemary, but also another plant chosen because some believe it discourages troubling dreams. Dreams matter here. They are not always dismissed as random nonsense produced by a tired mind. A vivid dream may be interpreted as a warning. A saint may appear in one. A dead relative might be thought to bring a message. A ruler who dreams of falling towers, broken crowns, black rivers, or unusual animals may wake with questions that keep clerks, priests, and astrologically minded advisors busy for days. Some swear that dreams seen just before dawn are more truthful than those seen earlier in the night. Others claim the opposite. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Naturally, medieval people managed to create disagreement even while asleep. The herb pouch is tucked near the pillow. Next comes a small cup, not wine this time. The liquid smells bitter. A physician has prepared it from herbs believed to calm the body and encourage rest. Perhaps it contains lettuce seed, chamomile, valerian, or another plant associated with sleep. Medieval medicine draws heavily on ancient ideas about bodily balance. Food, drink, weather, age, temperament, and season are all considered when deciding what helps or harms a patient. Too much cold is dangerous. Too much heat is dangerous. Too much dryness. Too much moisture. Apparently, the human body is expected to behave like a very demanding stew. The king drinks only a little. His expression suggests that whatever health benefits the mixture possesses, flavor is not among them. You hide a smile. Near the door, one servant ties a small blessed thread around the handle of a chest. Another touches the cross at his neck. These little gestures are easy to overlook, yet the medieval night is filled with them. A whispered prayer before lying down, a charm against toothache, a scrap of scripture carried in a pouch, a saint invoked during thunder, a horseshoe placed where tradition recommends, a piece of iron kept nearby because some people believe iron repels troublesome supernatural beings. Not everyone believes the same things. The Church approves some practices and condemns others. Priests may tolerate certain customs while warning against charms that seem too close to magic. Villagers, nobles, servants, and even educated courtiers can hold several ideas at once without finding the contradiction troubling. You can pray to a saint and still hang herbs beside the bed. You can trust a physician and keep an old charm. You can laugh at one superstition and quietly obey another. The chaplain blesses the king. The cross is returned to its place. The reliquary remains beside the bed. The little herb pouch rests near the pillow. A final candle is extinguished. Smoke curls upward from the wick. Only 2 flames remain in the chamber now. The chaplain leaves. The door shuts. Once again, the winter night gathers around the room. But the king is not considered entirely unguarded. Around him are curtains, blankets, attendants, prayers, relics, herbs, old customs, and the accumulated habits of generations who have all wondered what might come near a sleeping person after the lights go out. You listen to the silence deepen. Beyond the chamber, somewhere in the corridor, boots shift against stone. The guards are still awake, and soon their part of the long royal night will matter more than ever. The guards outside the chamber do not speak unless they need to. You notice this only after several quiet minutes because their presence has become part of the architecture. 2 men beside the door, another farther down the corridor, and still more beyond the next turn where the passage leads toward the stair. The castle may be settling into sleep, but the king's security never truly sleeps with it. One guard shifts his weight. Leather creaks. The butt of a spear touches stone. Then stillness returns. You step into the corridor with a chamber officer and feel the cold immediately. The private room behind you holds warmth, but here the air is sharp enough to sting your nose. A narrow slit window at the far end has been shuttered, yet a thin line of wind whistles around the wood. The officer carries the ring of iron keys you noticed earlier. They hang from his belt with surprising weight. A medieval castle contains locks everywhere. Doors, chests, storerooms, gates, treasury rooms, armories, wardrobes, and chambers. The keys can be long enough to look like tools rather than pocket objects. The officer chooses one. He checks the lock on an inner door. The iron turns with a heavy scrape. Security here depends less on invisible systems than on wood, stone, metal, people, memory and routine. Who has the key? Who is on watch? Which door is barred? Who was admitted before the king retired? A mistake in any one of those details can matter. The men guarding the sleeping ruler are chosen with care. Some belong to household offices built around personal service to the monarch. Others are soldiers assigned to chambers, passages, gates, or walls. Their duties vary, but the principle remains simple. The closer the door is to the king, the more carefully access is controlled. Not every nobleman can simply wander in because he has a fine cloak and an impressive grandfather. Medieval bureaucracy has its limits, but apparently it can still invent the phrase, "You are not on the list," without actually saying it. You follow the officer farther along the passage. At the next doorway, a guard asks a quiet question. The officer answers with a word, a password. It may change regularly, especially when the court fears trouble or when the king travels. Spoken passwords help guards distinguish expected household members from people who have no business moving through protected spaces after dark. Some swear that particular rulers choose religious words, saints' names, or short phrases as passwords. No one can quite agree how consistently such systems are used in every castle, but guarded entrances and controlled access are certainly part of royal life. The door opens. Beyond it lies a small guard chamber. A brazier glows in the center. 3 men sit on benches wrapped in cloaks. One drinks from a cup, another rubs his hands, a third checks a lantern. They are awake, but only just. Night watch is less heroic than songs suggest. Much of it is waiting, listening, trying not to fall asleep. Trying not to decide that every scratching sound in the wall is an assassin when it is probably a mouse. A bell sounds faintly in the distance. The watch changes. 2 men rise and tighten belts around their wool tunics. One pulls on gloves. Another wraps his cloak more closely before stepping towards the outer stair. You go with them. The stone steps coil downward. Torchlight paints the walls in moving amber. At the bottom, another locked door separates the inner residential range from a larger passage, connected to the courtyard. A sentry opens a viewing slit before lifting the bar. He looks outside. Only then does the door move. The courtyard beyond is almost black. Watchfires burn at intervals near the walls. They are not enormous flames. Wood is valuable, and uncontrolled fire inside a fortified complex is dangerous. Instead, men gather near smaller heat sources when duty allows. The winter sky above is clear now. Stars hang over the battlements. Frost glitters on the yard. You hear boots from the wall walk above. The outer defences form another ring around the sleeping king. Gatehouse, portcullis, drawbridge where one exists. Walls, towers, patrols, dogs, locks, bars. Men who know who should be inside after dark and who should not. Yet none of these systems is perfect. Castles are crowded. Servants enter and leave. Messengers arrive. Guests stay overnight. Kitchen workers move before dawn. Stable hands cross yards at strange hours. A royal residence is not a sealed fortress occupied only by soldiers. It is a working household, administrative centre, warehouse, barracks, chapel kitchen, stable lodging house, and political stage all at once. Security must therefore distinguish normal movement from suspicious movement. That is harder than simply closing a gate. Near the gatehouse, a guard checks a bolt on a thick oak door. Iron straps run across its surface. Another man keeps a lantern partially covered so that its light does not ruin his night vision. There are stories of kings who sleep with weapons beside the bed of hidden passageways known only to loyal servants, and of guards tested by disguised officers. Some of those stories grow with retelling. Those who tell the tale never fully agree which ruler truly does what, but fear itself is real enough. A sleeping monarch is vulnerable. He cannot issue orders while dreaming. He cannot see who enters. He depends on the loyalty of people outside the curtains. You return toward the inner chambers. At each threshold, the layers close around you again. Barred outer door, guarded corridor, locked inner door, trusted officer, chamber servant, curtained bed. Tonight, the protection becomes quieter as you approach the king. At last, you stand again outside the royal chamber. The guard there has not moved far. His hands rest near his belt. His eyes remain open. Behind the oak door, the king sleeps beneath wool and fur. Beside the hearth, the dog sleeps, too considerably less concerned with dynastic security. You hear the fire settle inside. A coal breaks softly. The guard listens. Nothing follows. So the long watch continues, measured not in battles or alarms, but in footsteps, bells, keys whispered passwords, and the slow passing of winter darkness beyond the walls. The first cough comes sometime after midnight. It is not the king. You hear it from the pallet near the wall where one of the attendants has been sleeping beneath a wool blanket with his boots placed neatly beside him. The sound is muffled at first, then followed by another deeper cough, the sort produced by a room that has spent hours holding smoke-cold air and too many sleeping bodies. The servant turns onto his side. For a little while, the chamber is quiet again. Then the king moves behind the curtains. The mattress creaks. A blanket shifts. You are beginning to understand that even the finest royal bed does not guarantee peaceful sleep. There are too many small enemies. Smoke is one. The fireplace chimney draws most of it upward, but not all. A change in wind can push a faint grey ribbon back into the chamber. Candles produce their own smoke. When wicks grow long, braziers must be watched carefully. By morning, the air may feel dry in the throat and heavy in the lungs. Then there are insects. Fleas do not respect heraldry, neither do lice. Bedbugs, too, can trouble households, hiding in cracks around wooden furniture and bedding. Servants air mattresses, change rushes, shake blankets, wash linen when possible, and scatter herbs believed to discourage pests. Some swear that wormwood, pennyroyal, lavender, or strong-smelling plants keep fleas away. Perhaps they help. Perhaps they merely make the fleas smell better. No one can quite agree whether every remedy works, but desperation encourages experimentation. You scratch your ankle. Immediately, you regret thinking about insects. Behind the curtain, the king turns again. A chamber servant rises. He opens the curtain a hand's width. The king says something quietly. The servant reaches for the cup beside the bed and passes it inside. A sip of warm drink may soothe a dry throat. If the problem is more serious, the physician may be summoned. Royal physicians have an impressive collection of possible explanations for poor sleep. The body may be too hot, too cold, too moist, too dry. Dinner may have been too heavy. Wine may have been too strong. Anxiety may disturb the heart. Bad air may trouble the head. The answer depends on the patient and occasionally on how confidently the physician wishes to speak at 2 in the morning. A small medical chest rests in an adjoining room. Inside are jars, cloths, herbs, salves, and instruments. If the king complains of headache, stomach discomfort, tooth pain, fever, or sleeplessness, attendants may bring preparations involving honey, vinegar, herbs, oils, or spices. For certain complaints, bleeding may be recommended. Leeches may be used. You decide that insomnia suddenly sounds rather pleasant. Medieval medicine is not simply foolishness, however. Many herbal remedies contain ingredients capable of soothing pain or irritation. Honey can comfort a throat. Warm liquids can help a cough. Willow preparations have genuine pain-relieving properties. Chamomile may encourage relaxation. The difficulty is that useful remedies exist beside treatments based on theories that do not always help. A person suffering in the night may receive both. The king shifts again. This time, the problem seems to be his stomach. The evening meal was rich. Meat, sauce, bread, spiced wine. Perhaps one pie too many. Royal wealth can produce its own inconveniences. A court physician might advise sleeping with the upper body slightly raised after heavy food. The bolsters beneath the king's head suddenly make more sense. Some medical texts warn against going directly to sleep after excessive eating. The stomach apparently requires time to perform its mysterious labor. You suspect the stomach has been issuing that advice for thousands of years. Outside, the chapel bell sounds. The note travels faintly through stone. One attendant wakes at once. Another does not. He snores. Not loudly. Just enough. A dry little rattle. The chamber officer opens one eye. The snoring continues. The officer clears his throat. Silence. 3 minutes later, it begins again. Even kings, it seems, cannot entirely escape sleeping near someone who sounds like a damaged bellows. Then, a new disturbance arrives. The dog dreams. His paws twitch beside the hearth. He gives one soft bark. Everyone freezes. The dog wakes, looks around as if deeply offended by whatever creature interrupted the silence, and rests his chin on the floor again. From behind the curtain comes a tired voice. The servant bends close. The king asks whether it is nearly morning. It is not. There are still hours to pass. This may be the most frustrating form of medieval sleeplessness. No clock glowing beside the bed, no easy way to know exactly how long remains before dawn. Bells provide rough structure, but between them darkness stretches strangely. People judge time by candle-length fire stars, habit, and the passing of church hours. A partially burned candle can serve as a crude measure. You look at the nearest one. Its flame has sunk considerably lower. Wax gathers around the base. The king settles again. An attendant suggests another herbal drink. This one smells of chamomile and something more bitter. Some swear that lettuce has cooling qualities and encourages sleep. Other remedies recommend poppy preparations, though their strength and safety vary greatly. Nutmeg, violet rose, and various herbs appear in traditions intended to calm troubled rest. Charms exist too. A written prayer may be placed beneath a pillow. A small cross may be held. Certain people recommend particular psalms against nightmares. Others advise avoiding foods believed to generate disturbing dreams. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether cheese deserves part of the blame. The chamber grows quiet once more. Your feet are colder now. The fire has settled lower. One servant rises to stir the embers, adding a modest piece of wood. He does it carefully, creating no sudden burst of light. The king needs warmth. He also needs darkness. The balance is delicate. You sit near the wall and listen to the castle's nighttime sounds. A mouse somewhere behind the tapestry. A guard walking past the door. Wind along the chimney. A cough. The faint scrape of a blanket. Nothing is dramatic yet. Every small discomfort explains why medieval sleep can be fragile even beneath royal fur. Cold feet. Smoke. Insects. Indigestion. Aching teeth. Restless servants. Bells. Animals. An anxious mind. Wealth can soften all of them. It cannot remove them completely. At last, the king's breathing becomes slow and even. The attendants settle again. The dog does not move. The candle flame shrinks. For a little while, at least the room achieves what all its layers of stone, wool, herbs, prayers, fire, and human effort have been trying to create since dusk. Sleep, and beyond the walls the winter road waits beneath frost, because soon the royal bed itself will have to travel. By morning, the royal bed is no longer merely a place to sleep. It becomes luggage. You discover this as servants enter the chamber before full daylight and begin loosening cords, folding blankets, gathering curtains, and packing the king's night into chests. The great bed itself may remain behind if the journey is short and another suitable bed waits ahead, but many royal households travel with an astonishing quantity of bedding, cloth furniture, clothing, vessels, candles, documents, devotional objects, and practical equipment. A king does not simply ride away with a cloak and a sandwich. The road begins in frost. Horse breath hangs white above the courtyard. Saddles creak. Pack animals shift under burdens wrapped in canvas. Carts wait near the gate, their wheels dark with frozen mud. Your shaggy dog appears from nowhere, fully prepared to join the expedition, despite having received no official appointment. The king mounts. You follow the procession beyond the walls. Soon the castle disappears behind mist. The road is hard at first, where overnight frost has stiffened the mud. Later, when weak winter sunlight touches the surface, it softens into ruts again. Travel changes everything about royal sleep. At home, the king has familiar servants, known chambers, established stores, reliable hearths, and walls whose drafts have at least been mapped by experience. On the road every night is an arrangement. Messengers ride ahead. This is essential.
A royal household is too large to arrive unexpectedly at a monastery or manor house and politely ask
Whether anyone has a spare pillow. Advance officers may inspect lodging, arrange food, secure rooms, organize stabling, prepare fires, and make certain enough bedding is available. If the king intends to stay at a great abbey, word may arrive well before him. Monks begin preparing guest chambers. Firewood is stacked, bread is baked, Allah is checked, fish may be brought from ponds, rushes are renewed. A chamber is swept and dressed with hangings if suitable ones exist. The monks may pray for good weather. Given the state of the road, you suspect this is the most important logistical measure. By afternoon, clouds gather. Rain begins. Not snow, rain. Cold, persistent, miserable rain. Your cloak darkens with water. The dog becomes a moving piece of wet wool. Ahead, a cartwheel drops sharply into a rut. There is a crack. The procession slows. One wheel has broken. Nobody reacts with surprise. Broken wheels, lame horses, flooded crossings, washed out tracks, and missing bridges are part of travel. Even kings cannot order a road to become dry through sheer authority. Men unload part of the cart. The damaged wheel is inspected. You stand beneath a bare tree watching rain drip from your hood. Medieval travel brochures, you decide, have once again failed you badly. Fortunately, the cart carries household stores rather than the king. A carpenter travelling with the group begins repairs while the lighter baggage is redistributed. Among the rescued items are folded blankets, very important blankets. After another hour, the procession moves again. Near dusk bells reach you through the rain. An abbey, its roofs appear beyond bare orchard trees dark against the grey sky. Monks wait near the gate. Hospitality toward travellers and important guests is deeply woven into monastic life, although welcoming an entire royal court can test even the most charitable soul. The king is received ceremonially. You are mostly concerned with warmth. Inside the guest range, servants have already prepared a chamber. It is not as grand as the royal bedchamber at the castle.
The walls are plastered, rather than covered everywhere with costly tapestries. The
Furniture is simpler, yet there is a fire. Tonight that makes the room beautiful. The king's own bedding arrives from the baggage train. Blankets are unfolded, pillows are arranged. A portable hanging may be fixed behind the bed to reduce the chill from the wall. Some courts transport bed hangings and even collapsible or easily assembled bed furniture precisely because familiarity and warmth matter on long journeys. The process resembles rebuilding a tiny piece of home wherever the king stops. You watch attendants inspect the mattress supplied by the monastery. One presses it. Another looks beneath it. The inspection is discreet but thorough. Fleas travel too. A suspicious monk watches from the doorway. Perhaps he is offended. Perhaps he knows exactly why they are checking. No one can quite agree whether he distrusts the royal servants or simply has the sort of face that makes every expression look suspicious. The dog distrusts him immediately. This seems unfair. After prayer and a modest supper, the king rests. Tomorrow the road continues. Other nights may be spent in manor houses belonging to nobles where the best chamber is surrendered to the ruler. Sometimes a hunting lodge provides shelter smaller and rougher, but positioned conveniently near royal forests. Roadside residences maintained for travelling elites can offer another option. In emergencies, accommodation may be improvised. A room is cleared. Rushes are replaced. A hearth is lit. A bed is assembled. Hangings are raised. Warm stones are prepared. Everywhere the servants fight the same enemy with the same weapons. cloth, fire, wool, fur, planning, and patience. Some swear that kings occasionally refuse lodging because a chamber is considered unhealthy, poorly situated, or unlucky. A room where someone recently died might make certain travelers uneasy. Strange dreams reported there could become part of local gossip. Even now, it is hard to tell whether practical concerns about dampness and disease sometimes hide beneath language about bad fortune. Tonight, no one complains. The abbey chamber is dry enough. The bed is warm enough. The guards know the doors. The chaplain recognizes the chapel. The suspicious monk eventually brings an extra blanket. You revise your opinion of him. Outside rain taps against the shutters. The travelling court settles into unfamiliar rooms. Horses breathe in the stables. Servants sleep wherever space allows. The king disappears behind curtains, once more surrounded by objects carried across miles of winter roads simply to recreate a few hours of security and warmth. And before the next dawn arrives, the fire will again begin to die. The coldest part of the night arrives quietly. There is no single moment when everyone notices it. No bell announces that the fire has weakened, that frost has thickened along the shutters, or that the stone walls have finally surrendered every scrap of warmth they borrowed during the day. Instead, the chamber simply becomes colder. You wake because your feet know before the rest of you does. The blanket over your legs is still there, but the air around your face feels sharper. Somewhere nearby, one of the servants shifts beneath his wool covering and pulls it higher over his shoulders. The dog beside the hearth has curled into such a tight circle that nose and tail have nearly disappeared into one another. The fire is down to embers. A faint red glow survives beneath grey ash. The servant responsible for the hearth wakes without being called. Perhaps habit does it. Perhaps cold does. He rises carefully, trying not to disturb the room, and crosses the rushes in stockinged feet. The movement makes almost no sound. He kneels beside the hearth. For a moment he simply studies it. Fire at this hour is precious. If the embers die completely, restarting them means more work, more noise, and perhaps carrying flame from another part of the building. So households often try to preserve fire overnight, beneath ash, nursing enough heat to make morning easier. The servant takes a thin piece of wood, then another. He places them carefully against the coals. A tiny flame appears. It trembles, dies, returns. You watch the glow spread slowly. There is something deeply reassuring about it. No roaring blaze, no dramatic shower of sparks. Just a small orange tongue of flame convincing itself to remain alive. Beyond the shutters, frost coats the world. You cannot see it, but you can sense its presence in the way the wooden panels feel colder than the surrounding wall. If opened now, they would reveal a courtyard silver beneath moonlight, roof tiles glazed with ice, and frozen puddles holding the impressions of yesterday's boots. Farther away on the walls, guards continue their rounds. Their work becomes hardest in these hours. The excitement of evening has passed. Morning still feels distant. The body wants sleep. A watchman walks beneath the battlements with his cloak wrapped tightly around him, one hand tucked beneath the opposite arm for warmth. His breath drifts ahead like smoke. At the next tower, Another man waits beside a sheltered watchfire. They exchange a few words. Nothing unusual. No rider approaching. No alarm at the gate. No movement in the fields. Only winter. Some guards carry lanterns protected by horn or thin, translucent material shielding the flame from wind. Others rely on torches, moonlight, or small fires positioned where they can be watched safely. A horn may hang nearby in case of danger. Tonight it remains silent. Inside the abbey where the travelling king sleeps, monastery life moves according to another rhythm. A bell sounds in the darkness. The tone reaches you faintly through walls and corridors. Monks rise for the night offices. Their schedule divides darkness into prayer rather than sleep alone. And this creates one of the strangest sensations of medieval nighttime. Even when the world seems still, someone, somewhere, is awake because a bell has told him to be. You imagine sandaled feet crossing a cloister, robes brushing stone, a lamp moving beneath arches, breath steaming in cold air. The monks gather in the church while most of the royal household remains asleep. No one can quite agree whether travellers find these nocturnal bells comforting or irritating. Perhaps both. A bell in darkness can remind you that civilization still exists beyond your blanket. It can also remind you that you were sleeping very nicely until someone struck a large piece of metal. The king moves behind his curtains. The bed hangings contain warmth better than the open chamber, but even inside them the temperature has fallen. One attendant wakes and approaches. He does not open the curtains fully. A hand appears. Then the king's quiet voice asks about the hour. The servant answers according to the bells. Still before dawn. The hand disappears. The curtain closes. You imagine the king sinking deeper beneath wool and fur. This is the hour when wealth proves most useful. A poor labourer sleeping in a small cottage may have wool blankets, straw bedding, and the warmth of other family members nearby, but the supply of fuel is limited, and the walls may leak wind freely. The king, by contrast, has multiple blankets, fur coverings, servants to feed the fire, portable hangings, warm clothing, and perhaps another heated stone ready if necessary. Yet the difference is one of degree. Neither man lives in a world where winter can simply be switched off. A servant checks the heated stone beneath the king's coverings. It has cooled. He replaces it with another that has been resting near the hearth, wrapped carefully in cloth. The exchange takes seconds. The king barely wakes. You think about how many people must remain partly awake so that one person can sleep comfortably. The fire tender, the chamber servant, the guards, the gate watch, the monks keeping the hours, the stable hands who may rise before dawn. Royal sleep is supported by an entire network of interrupted sleep. Near the wall, the suspicious monk you noticed earlier appears briefly at the door. He carries a small bundle of wood. He whispers to the servant and leaves it beside the hearth. The dog opens one eye. The monk looks down. For the first time, the dog allows him to pass without suspicion. Peace has been achieved. Perhaps firewood is the foundation of diplomacy. The flame grows slightly stronger. Warmth begins to return around the hearth, though the far corners of the chamber remain cold. A faint smell of smoke mingles with beeswax and damp wool. The half-burned candle on the table is relit for only a moment while the servant checks the room. Its light reveals the same quiet objects you have seen all night. Oak chest, folded cloak, iron key, cup, curtain, rushes, sleeping dog. Nothing has changed, and yet everything feels different at this hour. Night seems older. The Castle Abbey Road and frozen fields beyond all appear to be waiting for something. Morning, perhaps, or simply permission to move again. Outside, the horizon remains black, but not completely. There is the faintest thinning of darkness towards the east. A guard on the wall notices it before anyone else. The fire settles. The bell fades. The king sleeps. And in the coldest hour before dawn, the entire household seems suspended between the last deep silence of night and the first small movements of another medieval day. The first true sign of morning is not light, it is movement. Long before the sun reaches the horizon, the sleeping household begins to loosen from the night. A servant rises from his pallet and folds his blanket. Another kneels beside the hearth, stirring the embers into a brighter glow. Somewhere beyond the chamber, a wooden bucket knocks softly against stone. Then the bell sounds, slow, measured, cold. Its voice travels through the abbey walls and across the frost-dark courtyard, calling monks toward prayer and telling everyone else that the night is finally beginning to release its hold. You open your eyes fully. The dog beside the hearth does not. He has decided that bells are an administrative matter. The king remains hidden behind the bed curtains. For a few more moments, nobody disturbs him. Waking a medieval monarch can be surprisingly ceremonial. Access to the royal body belongs to particular servants and officers, and the first moments of morning may carry as much hierarchy as the last moments before sleep. The chamber is therefore prepared before the curtains are opened. Fire comes first. 2 pieces of split wood are added carefully. Flames climb. The servant waits until they burn cleanly, avoiding a sudden cloud of smoke. Next, a candle is lit from the hearth. Then another. Beeswax light spreads across the room, revealing the pale shapes of furniture and the tapestry along the wall. The shutters remain closed. Outside is still too dark and too cold. A basin arrives. So does a pitcher of water. The water is not icy. Someone has already warmed it near another fire. This small luxury matters enormously. You have only to remember yesterday's frozen road to understand why. A folded linen cloth is placed beside the basin. A comb follows. Then clothing. The king's garments have been selected according to the weather and the day's expected business. Linen underclothes come first, followed by woolen layers and a heavier outer garment. If the court intends to travel again, fur lining will be welcome. One servant holds the clothing near the hearth, not close enough to scorch it, just close enough to remove the chill. This may be one of the gentlest luxuries of kingship. Not crowns, not jewels, warm sleeves. You look at your own cold tunic and decide history has underestimated the political importance of preheated clothing. The chamber officer approaches the bed. He pauses, then he speaks quietly. The king answers from behind the curtain. Only now is the fabric drawn aside. A little pocket of trapped warmth escapes. The king sits upright among pillows and blankets' hair, untidy face heavy with sleep. For a brief moment, he looks less like a ruler than any man reluctantly discovering that morning has arrived. Some swear that certain kings are awakened with formal phrases emphasizing divine duty or royal responsibility. Others seem to prefer quieter household customs. No one can quite agree how much ceremony surrounds every morning in every court, but one thing is certain. The king does not simply leap from bed and begin governing. The transition is gradual. A servant offers warm water for the hands and face. The king washes. Another hands him a cloth. A small amount of scented water may follow, carrying rosemary or rose. Cleanliness in elite households often relies on washing particular parts of the body rather than taking a full immersion bath every morning. Hands matter especially. Face, mouth, sometimes feet. Clothing and linen are changed as needed. The king reaches for the small cross near the bed. Morning prayer begins before dressing is complete. The chaplain enters with the same leather-bound book you saw the previous night. His breath still shows faintly in the colder passage behind him. He bows. A short prayer follows. The reliquary remains nearby. The herb pouch still rests near the pillow. The night has passed without alarming dreams, at least none the king chooses to mention. A good sign. Perhaps the lavender receives credit. Perhaps the saint. Perhaps the feather mattress. Medieval explanations are generous enough to allow all three. After prayer, dressing begins in earnest, one garment at a time. Linen, wool, stockings, shoes, a belt, a heavier outer layer. The king does not need to perform each fastening himself. Servants assist smooth fabric, secure ties, and make certain that nothing sits awkwardly. Clothing is both practical and political. Quality announces rank. Fur announces wealth. Color can signal status. Cut and fabric separate ruler from servant even before anyone sees a crown. Yet winter reduces fashion to one basic question. Is it warm enough? A fur-lined mantle is brought forward. The king puts it on. His shoulders relax slightly. The chamber door opens. Cold air enters at once. Everyone feels it. Even the dog wakes. He raises his head, looks offended, and then follows the king toward the doorway. Outside, the abbey is already alive. Monks cross the cloister. Servants carry bread. Stable hands lead horses into the yard. A kitchen fire sends smoke into the pale sky. The road beyond the gate is silver with frost. You step into the corridor with the household. The half-burned candle from the night remains behind on the table. The warmed stones lie cooling near the hearth. The bed curtains hang open now, releasing the last of their trapped heat. In a little while, servants will shake the blankets, air the bedding, check the mattress, clean the chamber, and prepare everything again for another night, somewhere farther along the road. The king walks towards the chapel. His boots strike stone softly. The dog trots behind. You follow. Outside the cloister arch, dawn has finally begun to appear. The eastern sky is pale blue-grey. Frost shines on every roof. Horse breath drifts above the courtyard. The bell sounds once more. You hear it differently now. Last night it marked darkness. Now it calls the household forward. The king has survived another freezing medieval night, not because the castle or abbey became warm, but because dozens of small precautions held the cold at bay. Fire Fur, wool, curtains, warm water, servants, prayer, routine. And as you step into the brittle morning air beside him, you realize that royal comfort has never meant escaping winter completely. It has meant learning how to live inside it. You step with the king beneath the cloister arch where dawn gathers slowly over the abbey courtyard and turns the frost from grey to silver. The air is sharp enough to wake every part of you at once. Horses stamp beside the stable wall. A groom breaks thin ice from a water trough. Somewhere in the kitchen bread is being carried from an oven, and the faint smell reaches you through wood smoke and cold air. The king pauses beneath the covered walk. Behind him, servants are already dismantling the little world that protected his sleep. Blankets are shaken, curtains are folded, warm stones have become ordinary cold stones again. The half-burned beeswax candle is extinguished and packed away. The chamber that felt so important during the night begins returning to what it was before the royal household arrived, a guest room of plaster timber, rushes, and winter air. You realize that royal comfort in the Middle Ages is not really about warmth as you understand it. It is about distance from discomfort. A peasant may wake beneath a wool blanket in a cottage with frost along the inside of the roof and smoke drifting from the hearth. A merchant may sleep above his shop beneath heavier bedding. A prosperous knight may have a private chamber, feather mattress, and wall hanging. The king possesses more layers between himself and winter than almost anyone. More wool, more fur, more firewood, more servants, more rooms, more candles, more people whose entire duty is to notice when his feet are cold. But winter remains on the other side of every layer. The king cannot command frost away. He cannot order the wind to stop pushing at the shutters. He cannot prevent a fireplace from losing heat through its chimney or a stone wall from becoming painfully cold before dawn. His privilege lies in having people and resources available to fight these things continuously. A servant warms his clothes before sunrise. Another tends his fire after midnight. Another carries his bedding along muddy roads. Another checks the mattress for fleas. Another closes the shutters. Another stands outside the door while he sleeps. The warmth of kingship is built from other people's labor. You watch a groom tighten the strap on a royal saddle. His fingers are red with cold. Nearby, the suspicious monk from last night carries another armful of wood. The shaggy dog trots over to greet him enthusiastically, now apparently having decided that anyone who supplies firewood deserves complete forgiveness. The monk scratches the animal behind one ear. Diplomatic relations continue to improve. The king enters the chapel. You follow quietly. Candles burn near the altar, their small flames reflected in metal vessels and painted surfaces. The morning office has already begun. Monks stand beneath the high stone arches, their voices low and measured. The king bows. His fur-lined cloak gathers around him. Here, wealth and cold briefly meet something larger than either. A ruler who has spent the night, surrounded by guards, attendants, relics, curtains and blankets, now stands beneath the same bells that wake everyone else. Some swear that certain medieval kings sleep comfortably even during the hardest winters because they are accustomed to cold from childhood. Others insist that royal chambers are kept wonderfully warm. No one can quite agree whether either claim deserves much trust. The evidence of castle life suggests something more ordinary. Kings become accustomed to managing cold. They do not defeat it. They layer against it. They organize households around it. They schedule journeys according to it. They consume food and fuel because of it. They build smaller private chambers inside enormous fortresses because heating a great hall all night would be absurdly difficult. And they surround beds with fabric because sometimes the difference between misery and comfort is simply preventing a draught from reaching your neck. After prayer, the king steps outside again. Full dawn has arrived. The courtyard is beginning to fill. A cart receives another chest. A clerk protects a bundle of documents beneath his cloak. The broken wheel from yesterday has been repaired well enough for travel. Horse breath drifts like pale smoke. The road beyond the abbey gate stretches toward frozen fields. You notice the same objects that have followed you since the first evening. The iron keys, the oak doors, the wool cloaks, the candle stubs, the dog. Even the smell of wet wool returns as servants fasten damp travelling garments. All of them now seem less like background details and more like pieces of the strange machinery that makes medieval life continue from one cold day into another. The king mounts his horse. Before the procession moves, you glance back toward the guest chamber window. Its shutters remain closed. Tonight, somewhere else, another room will be prepared. Perhaps a manor, perhaps another castle, perhaps a hunting lodge beneath dark trees. The same curtains may rise again. The same feather bedding may be shaken out. The same warming pan may slide between cold sheets. The same servants may test the fire before the king closes his eyes. There is comfort in the repetition, and now the road begins to move beneath you. The abbey bells grow softer behind the procession. Frost breaks beneath hooves. Fields stretch pale beneath the morning sky. The dog trots for a while beside the horses before finally climbing onto a baggage cart where he curls between folded blankets as though he has personally earned them. You suspect he believes he has. And perhaps he has understood the lesson of the journey better than anyone. In winter, take warmth wherever you find it. The road continues beneath bare trees. Smoke rises from village chimneys in the distance. Somewhere, a farmer opens a barn door. Somewhere, a monk closes a prayer book. Somewhere inside a castle, servants are carrying wood upstairs so that a chamber will be ready by nightfall. And slowly, almost without noticing, you stop following the royal procession. The horses move farther ahead. Their hoofbeats soften. The bells are very distant now. The cold morning begins to blur into something quieter. The road grows still. The wind settles. You no longer need to think about shutters or fires, about wet cloaks, frozen stones, or the long dark hours before dawn. The castle is far behind you now, its towers softened by mist, its windows glowing faintly in memory. Inside, a small fire remains. A bed waits behind heavy curtains. The blankets are deep and warm. No guard needs anything from you. No bell is calling you to rise. The half-burned candle gives one last, soft light against the wall, and even that begins to fade. The old stones become quiet. The winter road disappears beneath darkness. The dog is asleep beside the hearth. The servants have stopped moving. The king is only another sleeping figure beneath wool and fur, while outside the snow rests gently along the battlements and no footsteps disturb the courtyard. You can leave the whole medieval world there now. Let the doors close softly. Let the fire settle into embers. Let the bells become so distant that you can barely tell whether you hear them at all. Nothing more is required of you tonight. You have crossed the frozen yard, warmed your hands beside the hearth, followed the candlelit corridors, and watched the long winter darkness pass. Now everything can become still. The blankets feel heavier. The room feels warmer. The last light fades behind the curtains. And while the ancient castle sleeps beneath the quiet winter sky, you can simply rest, breathing slowly, letting every distant sound disappear until there is only warmth, darkness, and sleep.